My husband of 5 years suddenly filed for divorce without explanation, but I overheard a shocking conversation with his friend that revealed everything. My husband is 32, and I am a 30-year-old female. We got married 5 years ago. We'd been dating for around 2 years, and I was head over heels in love with him. So when he asked me to marry him, I didn't think twice before saying yes. My husband was an actor struggling to find work back then, and I'm a surgeon, so I pretty much covered all the household expenses. I didn't mind it at all since I wanted him to go after his dream and was more than happy to take care of all the bills. He barely made half of what I did and would only be cast as an extra in most scenes, but he never gave up. Recently, he landed a minor role in a full-length film, and I was thrilled for him. He has around 10 to 15 minutes on screen, but even that's a massive deal for him, and I was thrilled about it. This happened a couple of months ago, and they were supposed to start shooting for his role in a few weeks. But then everything fell apart for me 5 days ago when all of a sudden, my husband served me with divorce papers. I was completely blindsided since I'd never even thought that he'd be asking me for a divorce. He seemed pretty happy with me, and so was I with him, so this was really sudden for me. He told me that he just didn't feel the same way about me anymore and wanted to devote more time and energy to his career now that he was finally getting serious offers. It was just the beginning for him, and he wanted a fresh start, so he couldn't be bogged down by the weight of his past life, which apparently included me. I couldn't believe that he was saying all of this to me, especially after all that I'd done for us, all the sacrifices I'd made, and all the times I'd made sure to put his dreams above myself that led to this. Eventually, I think I must have cried for hours that day and literally begged him to give our marriage another shot, but he was done. He told me that there was nothing that I could fix anymore and that he just didn't have any feelings for me, which is why it would be in our best interest to separate now. Then he packed up his stuff and left me broken-hearted. That was 5 days back, and I was absolutely lost. For the next 4 days, I didn't even go to work, that's how depressed I was, and I just kept wishing that I'd wake up from this bad dream. Then yesterday, I received a call from my husband asking me if I could drop off some of his more formal clothes at his friend's house, where he's living right now, since he has to attend a meeting tomorrow. I agreed readily since that would give me an opportunity to see him in person, and I could try to convince him to come back once more. I guess I was feeling pretty desperate, so I did what I had to and headed over to his friend's place. Once I got there, I realized that the door was open, and I could hear the sound of my husband and his friend talking inside. I was about to knock and enter, but then I heard his friend ask him why he'd even married me in the first place if he didn't have any intention to stay with me. That caught my attention, and I decided to stay silent so that I could eavesdrop on their conversation and get some answers. At least it seemed to me that they'd already been talking about me, and I just happened to walk in on them at the wrong time, well, the right time for me. But yeah, before answering his friend's question, my husband let out a laugh and then went on to say that the only reason he married me was so that he could use me to get ahead in his career. Other than that, there was no love for me in his heart, and over the years, he cheated on me countless times with random women he'd met on set or at parties. I almost let out a gasp, but I somehow managed to control it because I wanted to hear more of what my dear husband had to say. He continued talking and revealed that he'd met me through a friend of his who told him that I was the daughter of a really reputed dental surgeon, which was true. My dad is one of the best dentists in the state, and my husband also knew that a really popular actor just so happened to be a frequent client of my dad since he'd heard about it from a couple of friends of his on the inside. Now, I can't take names for obvious reasons, but that's also true. Gradually, all the puzzle pieces started to fall into place for me as he went on talking. He explained how he'd asked me out as a last-ditch effort to make his acting career work, and the fact that I was pretty rich and easy to manipulate was just a cherry on top. So for 5 years, he pretended to love me while waiting for an opportunity to interact with my dad's famous client. The opportunity finally presented itself at my dad's 50th marriage anniversary party around 5 months ago when he finally invited a lot of his friends and, of course, his most popular client, who also happened to be a close friend of his. I had no idea how, but my husband had managed to speak to him at the party and even impressed him by turning on the charm and ended up exchanging numbers with him. My dad's client had been there for only half an hour since he was really busy otherwise, but even in that half an hour, my husband had managed to get his number. As much as I detest him now, I have to admit that my husband can be pretty charming when he wants to, so I wasn't surprised that he managed to pull it off. But the fact that this is the reason he wasted 5 years of not just his own life with me but put me through unimaginable heartbreak? Yeah, I couldn't handle it. To top it all off, I was the reason he'd even landed this role in the first place because the director of this film signed him at my dad's client's advice. So this was all thanks to me, and yet I'm the one who's been cheated on and is now supposed to get divorced. I really felt like walking in and punching him in his face, but I kept my calm, walked back to my car, and drove back home. This was in the afternoon yesterday, so I had plenty of time to rage and come up with a plan to get back at this selfish monster. I came back home and tried to meditate for a while because I felt furious and was scared that I'd probably end up hurting him physically if I didn't bring my emotions under control. So I did everything to divert my attention and come up with a plan to destroy him. Otherwise, the only thing I could think of doing was asking for the actor's phone number from my dad, calling him up, and demanding that my husband be fired from the film. But I wasn't sure if that would work since this was a professional thing, and I didn't know if they'd even care about what I had to say. My dad's client had known me since I was a college student, and we weren't particularly close, but he knew me better than he knew my husband, obviously. So eventually, I decided that it was at least worth a try and ended up calling him in the evening after talking to my dad. I hadn't yet told anyone about the divorce, not even my family, since I believed I could still turn things around, and this was the first time I was about to acknowledge it, so I felt nervous as hell. His assistant put me through after a few calls, and after a bit of uncomfortable small talk, I finally blurted out what I wanted him to do and didn't stop talking until I told him everything I had to say. I explained to him that my husband had been cheating on me and had essentially used me and my dad's contacts to land a role in a film, and if there was any justice in the world, he would use his influence to have him fired from the film. I said this all in one breath, and I'm sure he felt as uncomfortable with this confession, if not more. There were a few seconds of silence before he said that he'd look into it and then hung up after I thanked him. Now, obviously, I was pretty embarrassed by what had happened, but it was done. I could only wait to hear back from either him or my husband, so that's what I did. I think around 2 hours later, at 10 p.m. at night, I received several frantic calls from my husband, and that's when I realized that he must have been fired already. I couldn't believe that this was happening and sent a thank you text to the man who made it happen. There hadn't been any contract, and it was just a verbal agreement anyway, so it wasn't much of a hassle for him. He texted back and even wished me luck for the future, so that was incredibly sweet of him, and that actually restored my faith in humanity. I ignored all of my husband's calls and texts, turned off my phone, and went to sleep without a care in the world. In fact, I think I must have had the best sleep of my life so far, and I'm not even exaggerating. But then this morning, a few hours after I woke up and was about to leave for work, I heard my husband screaming for me from right outside the door and begging me to open up. I had no intention of letting him in and told him that I needed to go to work, so he needed to leave. He wasn't ready to budge and kept requesting me to speak to him just one last time before I decided to cut him out of my life. After a while, it got kind of boring, so I let him in and told him not to waste any more of my time. He fell straight to his knees and started groveling, saying that he'd made a mistake and that I was the only woman he'd ever loved, so I needed to give him one more chance. But now I was aware of just how great an actor he was, so I didn't feel sorry for him in the least. I let him sob for a few minutes and then asked him how that acting gig in the film was working out for him. I'd made sure that it sounded like I was mocking him because, let's be real, that's exactly what I was doing. I think he must have looked surprised for a second or two before he stood back up, letting the reality sink in. Once he'd finally figured out that I'd been the one behind him losing out on the opportunity of a lifetime, he went berserk and started screaming in my face about how I'd ruined his life and that he was going to make me pay for it. I didn't hold back either and yelled right back, saying that he'd been the one who ruined 5 years of my life and that he deserved this and even worse. We must have been screaming at each other for around 5 minutes, but then he finally seemed to break down because he knew that no amount of screaming and shouting was going to bring back what he'd lost, not the role and definitely not the good life he'd been leading with me. He had nobody else to blame for it but himself. I almost felt sorry for him, but then even while he was crying, he made sure to warn me that he'd take away everything in the divorce and make sure I ended up on the street. Now those were some bold words, and any sympathy I felt for him vanished immediately when he said that. I told him as politely as I could to get the hell out of my house, and he obliged, still crying but continuously calling me curse words under his breath. I decided to skip work once again today since what had happened was really heavy and awful, so I'm just not in the right state of mind at the moment. AITA for ruining my husband's career right before it took off because he'd been using me for years and had even been cheating on me? Update 1. I finally told my friends and family about the divorce, and they were just as blindsided as I was when my husband had first told me about what he wanted. But then I explained what I'd overheard at his friend's house, and they were all so disgusted that they even told me that what I'd done in retaliation was nothing in comparison to what he'd done to me. My dad was obviously livid that his son-in-law had used me and him to get what he wanted. He wanted to go over to his place and knock some sense into him with his fists, but I managed to calm him down somehow. I'm glad that most people agree with the fact that what I did was totally justified because what he'd done to me was beyond cruel. He basically ruined my faith in men and marriage forever, so I think he deserved to have his hard work taken away from him. If he'd invested years in his career, then even I had invested several years and a crapload of money in our marriage. So if he could single-handedly ruin our marriage, then I don't think me single-handedly ruining his career should be that big of a deal to him either. But I guess it is. For whatever reason, he feels that he was robbed of an opportunity because of me and keeps pestering me online to take back what I said and somehow help him get the role back. I keep blocking his accounts, but unfortunately, he's desperate enough to keep creating new ones, so I'm considering going off of social media altogether. I don't know why exactly he feels entitled enough to even text me after what he's done, but I think after a while, he'll realize that he's done for and there's no going back from this. I guess whatever he'd said about ruining me in the divorce was just nothing more than words after all, because both of us know quite well that he's not actually capable of doing literally anything to me. Update 2, I blocked my husband on social media and deactivated my account a few days back, but now I guess I have to change my phone number as well, since last night I've received around 70 to 80 spam calls from several different numbers, and it's getting on my nerves. Every couple of minutes, my phone starts buzzing relentlessly, and it's always some new number. I don't know how he's doing this, but I know it's him who's doing it. I even called him to make him stop and even tried to warn him, saying that these little stunts would definitely affect the settlement. Obviously, I was bluffing, there's no settlement. I don't owe him anything, but I was still trying to use it as leverage so that he'd stop bothering me. But he was hellbent that he had nothing to do with any of this. I could tell by his voice that he was lying, but he kept denying it, and that was even more frustrating for me to deal with. Towards the end, when I was about to cry, he implied that the calls might stop by some miracle, and the miracle involved him getting his role back. I actually ended up screaming some select curse words at him through the phone as loud as I could and then turned it off. I still haven't turned it back on, and I'm using my laptop to access the internet right now. I'll only turn it back on after I can get a new number, and hopefully then he won't be able to drive me nuts because he won't even be able to get to me. As for the divorce, I think everyone knows that I'm not going to contest it, and we're supposed to appear in court in a few days. I don't know why he's misbehaving with me in spite of the fact that we're supposed to see each other in court in just a few days, and he knows very well that I can mess him up if I want to. Lucky for him, I don't really want to. I did what I had to, and now I just feel like letting this whole thing go peacefully and without putting up a fight anymore. I don't think holding on to this rage and letting myself be bothered by his existence will ever allow me to truly move on from this episode, so I just want to be done now. I don't care what becomes of him, whether he succeeds in the future or fails. I just don't care and don't want anything to do with him anymore. Update 3, so the day after tomorrow, my husband and I were supposed to appear in court, and of freaking course, he couldn't just let that happen without doing something insane and psychotic. I changed my numbers, and so he couldn't get to me anymore since my social media accounts were deactivated as well. I was so sure that I had him beat this time, and he'd just have to give up. But I guess I underestimated just how psycho he is. I was on my way back home last evening and was about to get into my car when my husband came out of absolutely nowhere and got into the seat beside me. Then he proceeded to lock the doors of the car from within before I even had time to react. As soon as I realized what was happening, I grabbed my purse to get my pepper spray out, but I was too late since he'd already taken it away from me and tossed my purse to the back seat. I was terrified and was ready to apologize or whatever it was that he wanted me to do. At that moment, he spoke to me really calmly, which scared me even more, and told me that he didn't want much from me. He just wanted me to call my dad's actor client up, take back whatever I told him, and make sure he gets the role. I thought that was easy enough, but my phone was in my purse, so I told him that I needed it to make the call. Now, I'm not stupid, but my husband sure is. As soon as he handed me the purse, I grabbed my pepper spray, and I think I emptied half of it in one go. I could barely see anything because my eyes were watering and stinging so bad, but his condition was even worse than mine, and he was literally spluttering for breath after getting sprayed. I unlocked the doors, pushed him out of the car, and left him coughing on the ground before driving away. I only managed to get out of the parking lot and a few yards away from my workplace before I got out of my car since I was struggling to see anything and definitely couldn't drive back home in that condition. Thankfully, a cab pulled up for me, and the driver seemed to be the helpful kind as well. He realized that there was something really off and offered to drive me to the nearest police station, and I said yes without thinking twice. The next 2 hours were a blur for me, honestly, because I was still really shaken up from what had happened to me back in the parking lot. I knew that my husband was crazy, but this was way more than what I'd bargained for. I could hardly even believe that I'd been happily married to this man for 5 years, and he was the one putting me through this crap. Now, thankfully, he was placed under arrest since he hadn't been able to get away from the parking lot because of how bad his condition was. When they brought him in, his face was still red and slightly swollen, and I'm glad that he was in pain. Once I pressed charges against him, I left, but instead of going back home, I headed to my parents' place instead. Honestly, I just didn't feel safe by myself anymore and haven't been out of the house ever since I came here. My parents have been really kind and have been looking after me like I'm their little girl again, so that's some consolation for me. My dad's promised me that he's going to make sure that this man gets a befitting punishment, and I'm not going to stop him. This time, some men need to learn that they can't just push women around and get away with it. Update 4. Hey there, it's been a few weeks since the last update, and I'm happy to inform you guys that my husband was sentenced to 3 months in prison and a hefty fine for what he'd done to me. I wish he'd had to face more time, but it's all right, this seems fair. As for the divorce, we were able to fast-track it, and it's going to be finalized way sooner than usual divorce cases given the circumstances. He's also not entitled to any compensation at all, so hooray for me on that as well. I've sold the house and even my car so that there's no way he can ever track me down again. I've also started working at a newer and better hospital, which is a lot closer to my parents' place, so it's more convenient for me to travel back and forth. Yeah, I'm still living with them since they absolutely refuse to let me go back to living by myself, even though my husband literally can't get to me anymore, at least not right now. But I'm actually sort of happy that they're keeping me close because honestly, I still haven't recovered from the shock of it all. I've begun therapy to deal with my emotions, but of course, it's going to take time to heal, and I can't just expect everything to go back to normal in a day or two. In spite of my best efforts to push him out of my mind, I still find myself looking back at the years that we spent together. I can't believe that it was all just lies and nothing more than that because some parts really did feel sincere. Every time I find myself thinking about him, I actively force myself to remember what happened afterward and the incident in the parking lot, and that seems to bring me back to the present. I know these wounds won't heal so soon, but I'm taking one day at a time, and hopefully, I'll be alright someday soon. I swear that day couldn't come soon enough.